Dragons! I will give you the greatest games on earth!
Show them you can fight or die trying.
From the producers of 300.
A 4-horse race is a suicide.
Let the games begin!
Starring Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins.
Behold, this arena will be built for Rome.
Rise or die.
Those About to Die. A new Peacock original series streaming July 18th.
We all love a nice warm day, but sometimes it gets away on us, and before we know it, too much is simply too much. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History from the Weather Network in Canada. For British Columbia in 2019, things were already so 2020. January was well above seasonal. February then went brutally cold. And as for March, it was threatening to rewrite the record books for drought. We picked the madness up this day in weather history. March 18th. We're going to open up just a day before. You know, they do this in television all the time when they want to get a quick catch up, and then the rest of it all makes sense. This March heat wave would go on to shatter 32 records on March 18th for the warmest weather across the province. One of the hottest spots of the province was Pitt Meadows. They hit a staggering 19.5 degrees Celsius, and that broke a record that had stood for 7 decades. 7 decades. Meanwhile, in Chilliwack, an almost 125-year-old record was erased. In 1896, the record for a daytime high of 20 degrees was set. But on this day, it soared to just a hair under 23. Then there was the hottest spot in the province, and that crown went to Squamish. Located midway between the metropolitan of Vancouver and the grand opulence of Whistler Blackcomb, they hit a rather pleasant high of 21.3 degrees Celsius. Some of the other day highs that broke records on the 18th included Hope, 22.8, breaking the previous record of 20.6 set back in 1947. Masset went to 15 degrees, tied a record that set back in 1900. Nanaimo went all the way up to 18.5. The previous record was 16.1, set in 1928. Port Alberni at 21.4 bested the previous record of 20 degrees, set in 1911. Powell River at 16.5 broke the previous record of 15.6 set back in 1947. And Victoria hit 18.8. The previous record set in 1914 was 17.2. When I return, I'm going to hit the details of March 19th, this day in weather history. But first, remember that This Day in Weather History can be enjoyed a number of ways. Right now, for instance, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my recording studio, so you get that perspective, which I suppose is kind of cool. And oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. And now, March 19th. On this day, another jaw-dropping 42 new record high temperatures were set across the province. I remember this day clearly while working on air at the Weather Network. And I remember being as jealous as I had ever been before for anything else, because I wanted to be in that heat. These are my favorite temps of all time. I remember seeing that Tofino broke its old record from 1928 of 19.4 when it got all toasty at 24.5 degrees Celsius. You know, that is a total beatdown of a record. So over on the lower mainland, they too saw a similar event unfolding. Abbotsford, as an example, set a record high of 24.5. The previous record was set in 1960. It was only 20. Pitt Meadows was back at it again. This time they were baking at 22.5 degrees Celsius, breaking a record that was set back in 1914. Even the big city of Vancouver set a new daily record for this day in weather history when they jumped to a high of 15.5, where previously the old record was 14.5. Now, I know that March is the meteorological start to spring, but the equinox is still 2 days away. According to Environment Canada, this kind of widespread heat in March had not been seen in 25 years. So, what happened? A strong upper-level ridge in the jet stream pulled in warm air from the south, while a high-pressure area was holding sway over the west coast, and that kept the skies clear and sunny as far north as Yoho Lake in the Northwest Territories, and they hit a high of just under 22 degrees Celsius, an all-time March record for that community. Oh, and as a pretty cool postscript, Squamish, Chilliwack, and others broke all-time March records again the next day on March the 20th. And some of those records, they were centuries old, dating back to the 1800s. But 42 of the over 100 records in this event fell on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is March 20th, and there is nothing quite like the rush of jumping from an ultra-hot sauna to the cold of a winter pool. Or, I don't know, maybe that's just me. Regardless, tomorrow we jump from over 100 heat records to a blizzard story from Colorado. It was one of the worst blizzards to hit the Rocky Mountain State since records began back in 1872. The Denver International Airport was forced to close, stranding about 4,000 travelers. But that was not the only place people were trapped and stranded. More on this story tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.